Good morning, grey and spotted kestrels. A quick revision video for you if you need it for the sequences work that is on your home learning for this week in our fractions. So I have made up some representations here for you to think about the whole and the parts that we discussed last week. So if I was identifying the parts for this representation, I know that the whole has been divided into 4 equal parts and therefore each section is a quarter. So if I was starting to think about counting up, be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, instead of saying 4/4, we know that that is equal to something. And I know that that is equal to 1 whole. And I know that if I shade in each of the 4 equal parts, that represents my whole. So we can count with 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. If I was then adding it to this one here, still the same representation because my whole is still divided into 4 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4 make up the whole. So I've got my 1 here that I've made up from 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. 1 and 1/4. 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4, and instead of saying 1 and 4/4, I now have 2. 1 whole made up of 4 equal parts that have 4 parts have been shaded, another whole that has been divided into 4 equal parts, 4 parts have been shaded. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. 1 and 1/4, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4, 2. So let's have a look. If we step away from the representations up here and we look at how it would look if we were representing with a numerator and a denominator and our vinculum across the middle here. So I've got 1 and 1/4, I've got 1/4, something missing, 3/4, something missing. Have a look up here at your representation. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and then this would be a 1. Now we do know that that is the representation as well, and that's okay. But when we're thinking about number sequences, we can have a think about changing that into a whole number, which is 1. Now, number sequences don't always, unfortunately, start from the smallest one. They could start from the largest and go this way, or they might start with a bigger number, not always to the beginning of the number line. So, for example, I've got one here, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4. What would be the next one? So we know that we've got a whole and 2 parts shaded that has been divided into 4 equal parts. We've then got 1 whole, 3 parts have been shaded, 4 equal parts. So I've still got my 1, but now my 1, and I know that it's now 4 equal parts, 4 parts have been shaded, but there's another way that I can represent this. We know that this is a whole, and so my answer is 2. 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4. The next one is 1 and 4/4, but I know that I could change that to a 2. Carrying on now with number sequences with thirds. Okay, so I'm going to draw some wholes that have been divided into 3 equal parts, and we're going to pretend that these are 3 equal parts. I know they aren't quite, but we're going to pretend for this that they are equal parts. But I don't want to start my number sequence from the very beginning. I want to start part way through. So I have 3 equal parts, and 3 parts have been shaded. So I know that it looks like this. 3 equal parts to the whole, 3 parts have been shaded, but I know that that also equals 1 whole. I also have this part here. My whole has been divided into 3 equal parts, 1 part has been shaded. So altogether I have 1 whole and 1/3. So I'm going to write that down here. Okay. And as I carry on my number sequence, I'm going to shade in the next one along in a different colour so you can see it. So I started with 1 and 1/3. The next one in the number sequence, still got my whole, but now I have 2 parts of the whole shaded. Now what comes next? I have my hole, but I also have another hole. Now I wouldn't put 1 3/3. What would I put? Remembering up here that 3/3 equals a hole. Brilliant. So my next one would be 2. So I have 2 holes. The next part, now I still have my 2 holes, but I have a third representation here. 3 equal parts, 1 part has been shaded. So I have my 2 holes and my 1 part has been shaded. Next along the line, still have my 2 parts, but my 2 holes, sorry, but my 2 parts have been shaded in. So I've got my 2. And then lastly, I'm not going to do 2 3/3 because I know that they're all equal to holes. So I've got 1 hole, 2 hole, 3 hole. I couldn't fit it up here. So when we're counting, it would be 1 1/3, 1 2/3, 2. 2 1/3, 2 2/3, 3. Give it a go. Give Miss Lightowler or myself a shout if you need any further support.